The Watership Down podcast is intended for listeners who are familiar with the plot. There will be spoilers. This episode is scripted by Newell Fisher and Leea Mäkelä and is narrated, recorded and edited by Newell Fisher. Hello, and welcome to the Watership Down podcast, episode 113, in which we will be looking at the fourth story from part 3 of Tales from Watership Down, chapter 15 of the overall book, Flyairth's Departure. We will also then be looking at the character of Flyairth in more detail, courtesy of Leea Mäkelä. First of all, I'm using a new kind of microphone this week as an experiment. It sounds very different to what I've done before, so please let me know what you think. I've had another email from Eric Steps, whose first one a few weeks ago was the first to verifiably be read out on Watership Down. Eric appropriately addresses the Lendry and the honeycomb of the approaching 1999 TV series of Watership Down, which I do plan to cover in detail. This will be the most controversial material yet covered by this podcast, as opinions are very much divided on it, and Richard Adams was very much not a fan. Eric also mentions the Watership Down video game. Oh yes, that apparently is a thing. I just had to find out more on this. So, German listeners, please pay attention to what follows. I want to know more. Quote, I see that the podcast slowly goes to this infamous TV series that I also watched as a kid. I liked it as a kid, but I must admit after I watched the movie again and then also read the book, I became less and less a fan with this too childish and in some aspects even silly TV series, especially with this horrendous third season. But there is one interesting aspect that could maybe form even the idea for a podcast episode. In Germany, this series was a big thing at the beginning of the 2000s and was heavily advertised on a channel aimed at children called Super RTL. In the hype of this series, there were also released some books based on the series by Judy Allen, where I have the first one that corresponds to the first 2 episodes. To my shame, I must admit I read this book even before the actual novel by Richard Adams. But maybe more interesting is another aspect. A small German company made some video games out of the first episodes of the TV series. I found out recently that there must exist at least 3 of these games, but it could be more. As a child, I only had the first game. It is very short for a video game, only an hour or 2 of effective gameplay, and it consists of 4 mini-games and some small interludes. The most interesting aspect is that it starts in Sandalford Warren, and even the Flyairth and some other Sandalford rabbits are to be seen. I think you know that the part of Sandalford Warren was completely cut out from the TV series, where the events start shortly before they cross the Enbourne. So this is the only time I know that we can see how Sandalford and the Flyairth looked in the 1999 TV series. I also think this is the only time something of Watership Down was adapted into a video game. So if you're interested, we can talk about it closer. I still have it here. It only can be that my PC is not able to process such an old game. In this case, there are also some videos on YouTube, but they're all in German. End quote. Thank you, Eric. I have to see this game. Laurie Pepper has also written again with a picture of him in Newtown Churchyard, which I said I would mention. Thank you for that, Laurie. I hope to make it there myself soon. So then, how do you solve a problem named Flyairth? Part 3, Story 4, Chapter 15, Flyairth's Departure. And back to my normal microphone. This is a short chapter, but a very important one for reasons that will become clear, for it marks the start of a new era in the Warren on Watership Down, after which nothing will be the same again. The opening quotation comes from Cicero's work In Catilinam and refers to a plot against the rulers of Rome. It is made up of a series of orations by Cicero against the plotting senator Lucius Sergius Catilina. In my copy of Tales from Watership Down, it is translated into English as referring to a female departing, presumably after her plot has failed. However, other translations I have seen refer to a male, which makes more sense in context. Is this regendering of the quote a subtle signal from Richard Adams that he approves of his character being regendered in future interpretations of his story, or was he misinformed about this quotation? Or did he just hope we wouldn't notice? Or am I overthinking this? Probably. In any case, Bigwig is not happy about Flyairth. She is telling all the young rabbits about the men on the path a few days earlier, and that they need to leave the Warren on Watership Down because of the threat of the white blindness. He says that she is trying to take over the leadership of the Warren. Shockingly, he then asks Hazel if he should kill her. Even more shockingly, Hazel's response amounts to, "Not yet." This is new. I do not think there is a single reference in the original novel to any possible killing of a rabbit in the warren on Watership Down, but then again we're only introduced to the beginnings of that warren, and the story does end, of course, with a brutal slaughter, albeit by a dog, but deliberately orchestrated by Hazel. Is this the reality of being a chief rabbit on Watership Down that Richard Adams always intended? That a rabbit who tries to take over the leadership, and especially an outsider, is under threat of being killed, even in such a seemingly nice democratic warren? It feels new, and to me a bit alien. According to Bigwig, it was only the Effraff and Does and youngsters who were listening to Flyairth, not those from Sandalford, nor Strawberry or Blackavar, the only non-Sandalford bucks. Bigwig scoffs at the idea of a female chief rabbit, pointing out that she was thrown out of her warren. Hazel decides to talk to Blackberry, Fiver, Vilthuril and Heisensley about this. They find them in a burrow along with Thuthenang, and Bigwig gets more angry as he tells them what is happening. He is adamant that Flyairth needs to be killed, and soon. Blackberry, ever the voice of reason, has his say. He says that he thinks the main issue is the white blindness, and that if it weren't for that, Flyairth would have settled in quite well. Bigwig still thinks she wants to be chief. Blackberry points out that humans only ever introduce the white blindness to warrens that threaten the food humans grow. Here on the Down, there are no such threat to human food, long-range raids notwithstanding, but if their numbers were to increase by too much, they might attract the wrong kind of attention from humans. Blackberry continues that Flyairth wants to set up a warren in a more isolated place, but there is nowhere so isolated that humans don't get to know about it if numbers get too high. Fiver chips in, continuing Blackberry's train of thought with the simplest of solutions. Let Flyairth go, and let her take as many of the younger rabbits as she can. There is no downside to this idea. In fact, she would be doing them a favour. Heisensley is concerned that those who wish to stay will be able to, and is reassured that no one will have to leave who does not want to for a long time. Later that day, Flyairth sets off on a 3-day reconnaissance for a new location for a warren. She finds an ideal new site and returns, inviting Hazel to come and see it for himself. Hazel politely declines. The next day, Flyairth sets off with quite a few of the younger rabbits to her new thinnial. She says she will not be coming back. But this part of the story is not over. One fine evening, some time later, Hazel, Heisensley, Vilthuril and Thuthenang are lying in the sun along with some of the bucks. For once it is the does who are named first in a group. They speculate as to how Flyairth is getting on and praise her good points. Bigwig says Keyhole will be back one day soon and can check how she is getting on. And then Silver says quite innocently that Flyairth will need a male partner to balance her judgment when she needs it. Hazel says he quite likes the idea of a female chief rabbit. He asks Heisensley if she would like to take this on. Heisensley reacts as if this is a joke, but they are all looking at her seriously. She agrees to be chief rabbit as long as Hazel also remains chief. She promises to disagree with him about everything. There is jubilation throughout the warren on Watership Down at this news. Heisensley has clearly built quite a following. That summer, a tired messenger arrives from Effraff asking to see the chief rabbit. Bluebell delights in asking which one, male or female, as they, quote, cater to all tastes here, end quote. As a final note, although Tales was written in the 1990s, of necessity the tales set on Watership Down in Part 3 are still set in the late 60s, following immediately on as they do from the original book. As a feminist revolution takes place in the warren on Watership Down, in the world of humans exactly the same is happening as the second wave of feminism is well underway in the Western world. Tales was written as third wave feminism was underway in the 90s, and in it the does of Watership Down begin their first wave, focusing, as did the British suffragettes over 100 years ago, on simply obtaining political power. The brief residency of Flyairth, the doe who beat a weasel, has had an immediate effect on the warren on Watership Down, and one that, you might argue, came at just the right time in both the human and rabbit worlds. Is it canon? Based on what I said about the previous chapter last week, yes, if you accept this chapter's premise, which overall I do. However, on another note, the sudden propensity to violence within the warren is a worrying and not entirely convincing counterpoint to this. Leea Mäkelä adds, quote, I only came to think now, was Spartina, the 1999 series fighter doe character, not based on, but inspired a bit by Flyairth? The series Darkhaven Warren doesn't seem to have much in common with Thyniel, or pretty much anything else in the source material, but Flyairth is described as a strong and capable fighter and mentioned killing a weasel, besides attacking a dog, so that might have sparked some inspiration. At least the 1999 Cranky Pants Bigwig was clearly based more on what Bigwig becomes in Tales than just the original novel. Flyairth herself is a bit hard to pin down. She is described as a fighter, but so afraid of humans that fear is severely limiting her capabilities. In a way that some think Flyairth is nice and fun, and some think that she's annoying, and some think both, is rather told than shown, and Flyairth is difficult to get a grip of. She doesn't seem like a solid character, or there isn't much such literary flesh around the bones that would make a reader form their own opinion. Is she nice or annoying, or how those traits would be twinned together? That made me think, though, how Thuthuinang doesn't even get a backstory. She's just a sidekick that exists but doesn't have much anything else defining her. I guess that's partly why the Netflix series made Thuthuinang a poet instead of Hyzenthlay, to even have something to base her character on. I thought that Hyzenthlay could be both a politician, head of resistance, and a poet who's able to think outside the box of a totalitarian regime and vision a new kind of society, just because she's also an artist. In a way, Tales takes away some of Hyzenthla's glory, suggesting she's been envisioning a new society because she's seen telepathically how things are organised in some other Warren. In Watership Down, she pretty much comes up with it by herself, or if she and Blackavara siblings, she's heard of possibilities from different Warrens from her mother growing up, but since that is not explicitly stated, it's more a fan theory. And Watership Down left readers thinking Hyzenthlay would have either escaped or started a full-blown revolution in Africa sooner or later, hadn't Bigwig appeared at just the right time to make the escape possible. As I've thought of some Tales stories as parallels to parts of Watership Down, I've been thinking, is Flyairth now some kind of mirror of how it would have been had Hyzenthlay gone wrong, or am I just trying to think of it in too complicated a way? First, what we heard of Thyniel. It seemed a pretty democratic Warren, and apparently it stayed so after Flyairth leaving. However, she seemed surprised by the democracy in Watership Down Warren, and is mentioned having thought of joining Efrafa because she'd heard things are well organised there. Somehow that all doesn't add up. Is Flyairth supposed to represent a politician driving anti-democracy, or is it just easy to interpret so in this era? What in the 1990s would have inspired that? After the pandemic, Flyairth obsessing about white blindness and protecting rabbits against deadly disease also hits different, especially since it seems that in today's human world, anti-democratic movements have allied with pandemic denialists. Or is Flyairth, who is nice but annoying for thinking so much of only diseases, perhaps representing a religious fanatic, or generally someone who's very invested in some one-idea movement? There's another mirror to Watership Down. Wasn't Sandalford Warren saved before our rabbit's time by the Flyairth taking a firm stand against letting anyone with the white blindness into the Warren? So basically they're trying to avoid becoming like Sandalford again when they reject Flyairth. But when talking about killing newcomers, they're becoming exactly what they're escaping from. Though luckily they do not start killing newcomers, but they also let Flyairth start a new Warren and take along all who want to go. Maybe it's a reminder, though, how soon there's a risk of turning into what they were escaping from, if not paying attention to choose otherwise. I was also thinking, does Bigwig turning sour suggest he's some kind of adrenaline junkie who might become dangerous during times of peace if he doesn't find other ways to tend himself other than being a fighter? There's a slight discontinuity in Flyairth being so afraid of humans as a source of white blindness, and her seeing just a Hlessi die of white blindness nowhere near humans mentioned in an earlier chapter, The Secret River. It's not like she's actually seen humans spread white blindness. But that does add to the feeling of the story being just stitched together of random ideas. End quote. Thank you, Leea. Thought-provoking as always. And this has also made me look at the portrayal of Bigwig in Tales again. Does he actually unmellow in the face of the challenge from Flyairth? Or should we expect his fight with Woundwort not to have actually changed his demeanour as much as we might have thought it had? To repeat myself, his sudden proposal of killing Flyairth is still a little jarring to me. It somehow just doesn't seem like our Bigwig of old. Next time, Hyzenthlay proves her worth.